I love Christmas traditions. I love Christmas lights, I love stockings, I love decorating the Christmas tree. It's all fun. Growing up, my family used to do the same thing every year. We would eat breakfast foods on Christmas Eve, that evening of Christmas Eve. Then we would open all the gifts from my parents. Yes, we would open gifts on Christmas Eve. I know that's a crime for some of you, but we would do it on the evening before Christmas Day. It was our thing. We would open our gifts on Christmas Eve, and then we would make reindeer food for the reindeers, and then we would make cookies for Santa Claus. Then we would watch Polar Express while wearing our matching Christmas pajamas and probably taking many photographs as well. Finally, we would all sleep, or at least try to sleep, in the same room all together. Then Christmas morning would come. Our parents would come wake us up pretty early in the morning, and they would slowly bring us into the living room to see what Santa had brought us. You see, typically in our family, Santa brought one gift, one big gift, something typically that we wanted more than any other gift that particular year. We would open that gift in our stockings, and then we would head to my grandparents' house for the rest of the day. That was my tradition for many and many years, and I loved it. And I'm sure your mind is being filled with the traditions of your family that you do year after year after year, and you're so excited and you can't wait to do those things on Thursday and Friday or whenever you do them. You see, traditions are fun, and they often become something that you do without even thinking. In fact, the definition of a tradition is this: it's a long-established custom or belief that has been passed on from one generation to another. You see, the reason why we, as a family, we open gifts on Christmas Eve, it's simple. My mom grew up that way. Why do we do a lot of the things we do? Well, it's just simply traditions that have been passed down for many generations. But I have a question for you. What faith traditions are you going to pass down to your children and your children's children? Or maybe parents, for you, the question is this: what traditions do you need to establish in your household today? You see, the Israelites, they were commanded to pass down faith from generation to generation. In fact, in the Bible, the first youth ministers ever talked about were parents. And they were talked about in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 1 through 9. So let's read that together. Deuteronomy 6, 1 through 9. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you, to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, and with all of your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them to your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. We'll get to that text in just a little bit. But as a youth minister, I've heard this following statistic more times than I care to admit, more times than I've ever wanted to hear this statistic. In any conference I go to, any class for youth ministers, any article about youth, you typically hear this statistic. Nearly 2/3 of United States 18 to 29-year-olds who grew up in church, they tell Barna, Barna is a faith-based research organization that they have withdrawn from church involvement as an adult after having been active as a child or teen. So that's pretty alarming, right? 2/3 of our youth that grow up in churches and are involved in churches from the time they're 18 to 29 fall away from the church. So every conference, every college, every church, they say this stat over and over, and then they say this. They'll read this stat and then they'll say, and this is why they're leaving. And sarcastically, I kind of chuckle inside because I don't believe that there's one reason that our youth are leaving churches. In fact, there's many reasons all piled up on top of each other why young people are leaving the church. And everyone has an opinion of why they're leaving the church. So because of that, let me go ahead and share with you one of my opinions why they're leaving the church. And it's this. We, as a church, as a community of faith, as parents in a community of faith, we have forgotten to share our faith traditions and the reason behind them. You see, this passage in Deuteronomy chapter 6 says that you are to teach your children. And here's the simple, practical things that this passage tells us to do. Number one, talk about it when you sit at home. When we're seated at home nowadays, there's typically two different things that we're doing. We're either eating or we're watching TV. The Israelites, they were commanded, talk about your faith. When you're sitting at home, talk about it. Number two, talk about it when you walk along the road. We don't walk along the road too often nowadays, but you can say that we've replaced that by driving cars and driving. And we certainly spend a lot of time in our cars, and typically that time is filled with devices, phones or iPads or different things, and music. Why not use that time to talk about your faith? The third thing the Israelites were told to do is to talk about it when you lie down and when you get up. Essentially, if the Israelites followed these commands to a T, there would be very little time to talk about anything else. In fact, their children would hear this message over and over and over again. The fourth thing they were told to do is to tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Israelites and even some Jews today still follow this command. They take this literally. They literally tie these commands on their foreheads and it's bind them as symbols on their hands. And it was and is a reminder to love God with every ounce of yourself. And then the fifth thing from this passage that they were told to do is to write these commands on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. When you're leaving your house or the city in which you live, the Israelites would have seen the words, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. You see, these are the faith traditions of the Israelites, something they were supposed to do and talk about daily. And I believe that there are some who are really good at doing similar things. There are some families that do a pretty good job about praying together, who do a good job about having a devo in the evening or reading scripture each and every day or talking about your faith with your children and your children's children. But I think a lot of times, even if we're diligent in talking about our faith and in doing the things, we leave out an important step. We leave out the why. And parents, if you currently have a teenager, you know this, but the current teenage generation, Generation Z, is really known for asking the simple question, why? Why do I have to take out the trash? Why do I have to go to bed at 10? Or maybe some more important questions. Why do we worship with no instruments? Why do we not have women leading prayers? All questions that I believe are probably asked genuinely by your teenager. But the problem often is not in the question, but rather in the answer. You see, far too often the response is because I said so, or because the Bible said so. The answer is there, but the explanation is not. And too often our young people are leaving the church not because they don't have the answers to their questions, but rather they don't have the explanation for their questions. So back to the question that I posed at the beginning of this lesson. What faith traditions do you want to pass down, or what traditions do you need to begin? In your family, use this passage, use Deuteronomy chapter 6 as a starting point. But don't forget the reason why you're building these faith traditions. You see, Deuteronomy chapter 6, down in verse 20, it says this: in the future, when your son asks you, what's the meaning of these stipulations, decrees, and laws that the Lord our God has commanded you? They're asking the question, why? Why are we supposed to command these? It's the question that we're often asked today as a church leaders, as parents, as a faith community. And here's the response that Moses gave them. He said, the reason we do all these faith traditions is because of what the Lord has done for us. He says, tell them the story about how God delivered your ancestors out of slavery, out of the land of Egypt. Tell of what the Lord has done for you and for us as a church and as a family. So what traditions are you doing and or going to start because of what the Lord has done for you? In this season of our lives, we're surrounded by so many long-standing traditions. So many traditions when it comes to presents or food or just different activities that you do with family each and every year. But let's not neglect the most important traditions, the faith traditions, the ones that are supposed to last from generation to generation. Well, I hope that you have a great Christmas and Merry Christmas, and we'll talk to you again soon.